Welcome to Inspiring Possible. I'm Christy Pennison, former stuck person turned therapist and dream consultant. Are you feeling stuck, overwhelmed, uncertain, or just need a little inspiration? Then I want to help you gain the clarity, confidence, and courage to create possibilities and live a life you love. Because folks, life's too short to be miserable. Happy summer. I don't know where you're living at, but if it is like in the South, it is getting warmer and hotter and just kind of one of those seasons where you're transitioning to different routines and different ways of doing things for a little period of time before we switch back into more of the fall and then the winter and then all the things that come with that. So, if you are feeling like summer is maybe a period of change for you, and that period of change is maybe making you think, maybe there's other changes I want to make in my life. Because sometimes summer you can slow down a little bit. I don't know who you are or where you're at, but sometimes it speeds up, sometimes it slows down. And you may be in a season that you're contemplating making some changes. Well, if that is you, then please tune in because we have a really excellent guest today who is going to talk about all the things associated with change. And this is actually a change expert, guys. So I like really dug deep and I'm like, who is a change expert? Well, that is Shannon Talbot. And she is here today to kind of talk a little bit about change, why it's so hard, maybe, Shannon, if you want to go there, and why it's important to embrace it. So welcome, Shannon.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here, Christy.
Yeah. Well, okay. Tell me a little bit, Shannon, where this like passion to help people maybe think how they view change. How did that all start for you?
Like most things, we have to go through some challenges in our lives to realize what we really want. And in my case, it wasn't anything traumatic or anything, but it was more like I was going through the motions of life. I don't know, I might be dating myself here, but I don't know how many of you played the game of life growing up. It's basically this, game where you pick which path you take for education and then what's your profession, how much money you make, getting married, buying the home, like all the things, right? And that's how I defined success for so long. So it's like, okay, did this, check, did that, check. And I was going through all the motions and everything. And I had ups and downs. My husband and I couldn't have kids on our own. We went through fertility. We ended up adopting our sons, so we had, lots of ups and downs on the path, but I was going towards that definition of success. But the thing that happened for me was when I got there, when I got those things, those check marks, I was like, okay, all right, that was cool. I did it. Now what? What's next? And there was almost this hole missing and like almost then this guilt of, oh, Shannon, come on. Like you've just done this thing and you've got the checkbox. Like you should, the famous should be happier. But I wasn't. And there was still this hole and things like that. And so it took me sitting back and taking a really hard look at my life to say, okay, what is it that will truly bring me more joy, more happiness, more energy, more love, all the things? What is that going to be? And I worked with therapists, I hired coaches, I did all this, soul searching, reading books and listening to podcasts and everything. And decided, I was living kind of the life I thought I should live and not necessarily an authentic life. So I worked in corporate for 17 years in banking and advertising. And I kept living how I thought I should be. And I wanted to rise the corporate ladder and I wanted to do this and do that. And I was losing pieces of me along the way. When I became a wife, when I became a mom, I set these expectations for myself that weren't necessarily realistic and were what I thought society was telling me to do. So I was no longer living an authentic life, which when you don't do that, then you're going to feel those holes. You're going to feel those gaps. And then in my case, I've always been one of these people who, even if it's hard, it's like, okay, if something's not working, I'm going to make the change. I got to do it. I'd rather do the hard work and put in the effort to have a better result than to sit feeling like, ugh, my life sucks.
I mean, and that is the worst, honestly. And I mean, I think anybody listening, maybe you're lucky. Maybe you did the things you wanted to do from the get-go and really got clear on what your life wanted to look like. But I do feel like everybody at some point in their life gets in a stuck place where they're like, the discomfort of staying the same is just like the pain. I'll go through the pain to change because I don't want to stay the same. What I'm hearing you say is that's what's kind of happened to you.
100%. Yeah. And it's funny. My son thinks I'm so weird. My son's 11, and he thinks I'm so weird because I actually like change, but most people don't. Most
Okay.
people don't like change. It's uncomfortable. It's uncertain. There's a lot of fear that comes up with change. Whereas I'm one of these people who's like, bring on the change. Like I'd rather like end up better on the other side. And and so now with my work, what I do is I help people embrace change. I help them see that, yes, it feels scary. There's no doubt. There's, fears that come up that are totally valid. But I help them see that by, pushing through it, they can actually thrive through change and they can make the changes and, bring more joy, fulfillment, happiness, meaning, whatever it is they're looking for into their lives.
Well, let's talk about this for a minute because you said something that I want to highlight that you are like, you've become a change embracer in your life where you're like, okay, I'm not going to like it, but I'm going to do it because you've seen the results of embracing change in your own life. But you highlighted that there is a lot of people out there, and it could still be us in an area where we don't want to have change or we have resistance to change. But what do you think? I'm curious, is the biggest barrier for people to change or for people to embrace change?
I think there's two. I think there's fear of the unknown, right? Even if we hate the situation we're in, it's familiar. We know what's going to happen. We know how we're going to feel. So even if it sucks, it's in a way comfortable. So we fear not knowing, right? Anxiety is not knowing. Anxiety is like fear of the unknown. The other piece of it is so we have fear of the unknown. And the other piece is it takes work, right? It takes work. We have to put in the work to make the change. And sometimes we don't know what that work is. Like in my case, I hired my first coach because I knew I wasn't happy, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. So in my case, it was for my career. Like I didn't want to stay in banking. When somebody asked me, what do you want to do? I'm like, I have no idea. I have no clue. So I need somebody to help me navigate that to figure out what I did want to do. So, right. So it's like the action, it's the fear of the unknown. It's easy to stay in our habits. Changing habits are really, really hard.
So hard.
Yeah. And I'm still guilty of this, right? I am a work in progress. I didn't start exercising until my late 30s, and it is still a struggle for me.
Yeah, in my mind, I thought nutrition. That's what whenever you're like, yes, there's some things I can change really easily, but there are some things that are so ingrained and it's easy to stay the same. It is hard as heck to change patterns of behavior that you have maybe done your whole life.
Yeah. And I think we also have a fear, and this one's a bit out there sometimes that we don't talk enough about. We have a fear of success. So it's like, oh, but if I make the change, like whether it's job, a relationship, I'm about to change cities. I'm about to leave the big city of Toronto and move my family to a small town. And it's like people are like, are you crazy? Why would you do, it's a big change. So there's so many different types of changes in our lives that are big and scary. And if it is a success, then sometimes that means we have to do the work.
Yeah. Let's talk about that for a minute because I don't think people really talk about the fear of success, right? I think when you listen to like, yeah, why is change hard? Yeah, oh, it does take hard work. And I don't think people always readily identify the fact that fear of the unknown and really labeling it that. But I do think sometimes it's not really talked about is this fear of success. So when you work with people, how do you see this show up for them? Like, how do you know, okay, well, this person really, they're not afraid to change. They're not really afraid of the unknown. They're actually okay to do the work, but they're really afraid of actually doing this change and it actually working? Like, how do you see this happen for people that you work with?
It's actually pretty easy, usually for other people to see it. You might not see it in yourself. It's when we self-sabotage.
Mm,
We trick ourselves. So it's like, yeah, I'm going to put in the work. I'm going to do this thing, and then we do it half-assed. Right? We do not give it our all. And it's like, but we tell ourselves, "Oh, I did it. I did the thing." But we're really not doing the thing. Like, we're doing that bare minimum so that we're tricking ourselves into doing it. And sometimes too, it's oh, I'm going to apply for a new job. Okay. So I'm just going to send out 20 resumes. I'm not even really going to cater them to the job description. I'm not going to do the cover letter. I'm not going to try and meet somebody who works at that company, but I'm sending out 20 resumes. And then I can be like, yep, I tried.
I did it.
Yeah.
It didn't work out for me again. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's like we don't put in our full effort behind it.
Yeah. As you're saying this, I get visualization sometimes. And the thing that's come into my mind or the picture is like somebody that's dipping their toe in the water, right? And they're like putting just the pinky toe in, and then they might put two toes in. And really what it requires for them to actually go and make this change that actually could really change the trajectory of their life is they need to take a few steps back, get a running start, and then just cannonball into that. I'm thinking of a pool, right? But like
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
pool,
love it.
some kind of body of water. But it's so hard to build up and actually risk what some people would say I'm risking so much for this change because I'm going all in. And I'm afraid that, like, what if it doesn't work? Or what if it actually works? And then I have all this other work to do because it worked, like
Yeah.
you said.
Yeah. It's funny. I had that same fear when I started my company. And a coach asked me, she's like, "What's your fear?" And it was like, we were going through the questions, and I thought I knew what my fear was. And then it was like, oh, no, I actually have a fear. I do speaking engagements at companies, and I wasn't really reaching out to a lot of companies to try and get their business. And at first I was like, oh, I'm fearful of being rejected. And then it was going through, and it was like, well, but being rejected is no further ahead than I am now. So am I really afraid of being rejected? So we dug deeper, and it was like, oh, no, I'm afraid I'll get the yes. And then I have to go do the talk. Then they get to judge me, right? I'm standing in front of all these people. I could do a great job. I could do a horrible job. They're judging me. And then I have to live with that. So it's like, but if I don't put myself out there, I don't have to get judged.
Yeah, and I can just say they didn't pick me. Yeah.
So we do all these little tricky things. Yeah, to justify not doing something, although we tell ourselves we're doing it. So yeah, it's to keep ourselves safe, like safe from embarrassment, safe from rejection, safe from, just not feeling good enough really at the end of the day.
Yeah, as you're talking about that, and I'm thinking about my own experiences too, like, as you're saying this, I think there just becomes this time when you think what I'm aiming for is bigger than something I've aimed for before, or this change that I'm trying to make is a lot of work that I don't really have the energy or motivation to. It is so crazy how you can so easily talk yourself out of something that just 5 minutes ago you were so passionate about doing and you could see the vision clearly. You could see how this change could really change your life if you implemented this change. And you can just put yourself in a deep hole and reject the idea as quickly as you came up with it. And I've seen a lot of people, even in my work, where that motivation, they come in with an idea and they're like, I want to change, but actually getting them to the point where they're like motivated to change and willing to do the hard work and do the discomfort comfortable stuff, the uncomfortable stuff. Discomfortable is not a word, folks, in case you didn't know that. But they do do the uncomfortable stuff, right? To get to the other side when it could be the best thing they ever did. So how do you help people figure out what of these things, whether it's the fear of the unknown, whether it's the hard work, where it's the fear of the success, how do you help people identify, just like that coach did for you, what is the fear that's holding them back or the thing that's holding them back from actually making a change that they may clearly identify that they know they want to make.
So I have an exercise I do with all of my clients, and it's based on Tim Ferriss, serial entrepreneur and author, did a TED talk on this. And he talks about how we will never actually achieve our goals and our dreams if we don't identify and overcome our fears. So I do this exercise with all my clients, and basically I have them pull out a piece of paper. So all of you listening can do this if you like. You can pause and do this as we go along. I have them pull out a piece of paper and basically write a brain dump of all of the fears, anxieties, worries that come up for them when it comes to making a change or accomplishing a goal or whatever that is. So they write them all down. Then I ask them, okay, how is this holding you back right now? What is it impacting? What parts of your life? What is it stopping you from doing? The next piece is where we all tend to go. We all do this, but usually in our heads is, what's the worst case scenario if this fear comes true? And this is the part where it's really interesting to write it down, because in our heads, when we're lying awake at bed at the end of the night and all of our worries and fears are, going through our heads and we can't sleep and we're thinking of all the worst cases scenarios of everything out there, they're really scary in our head. But when we go to write it down on paper, we tend to become a bit more rational. So, I've had a client before where it's like, oh my gosh, if I speak up in a meeting and share my opinion, and my opinion's dumb, then I'm getting fired and I'm going to be homeless tomorrow, right? We go to saying something stupid in a meeting and I'm homeless. Once you write that down, you're like, maybe that's not going to happen. Maybe I'm going to feel embarrassed. Maybe I'll feel embarrassed for a week. Who knows, right? Depending on you. So once we write it down, it becomes a bit more realistic. The next part is, okay, then what's plan B? So that happens. So you feel embarrassed. Then what? Well, you've learned a lesson that you maybe don't say that thing in a meeting next time, or, whatever it is. There's always a plan B that we can have. And then the part that Tim Ferriss doesn't talk about that I think is so, so important that will help motivate us to make the change is, what's the best case if you overcome that fear? If you put yourself out there, if you show up more authentically, if you do the thing and make the change, what could happen? And use that to then focus on to drive us to take those small action steps.
Yeah. And listen, I mean, what could happen? I don't know about you, but Shannon, as you've kind of taken these leaps yourself and really leaned into change and started to get a clearer vision of what you wanted your future, not the shoulds, which maybe we should talk a little bit about that too. Because I do think there's a lot of sometimes pressure on what we think people or what we think life should look like. And maybe we can get into that. But what is the thing that kind of helps you, what helped you just continue to just push past and think about those best case scenarios? And I'm curious, did some of those best case scenarios come true for you?
Yeah. So I actually do an exercise every day where I do a visualization. And I was never somebody who used to do visualization. I wasn't somebody who manifested. That was not me. I have a business background. I don't even have psychology courses or anything.
I ain't got time for that woo woo stuff.
Yeah, that was not me. I was not you exactly. I'll occasionally read my horoscope. That I will do. But but normally, it was like I'm a realist. But what I did was I let myself. So in 2019, I visualized what I wanted for my life by 2030. So I gave myself 10 years. And I wrote down what I call the 10 feels. And it was 10 sentences written in the present. So pretending it's 2030, I wrote down 10 sentences that covered all areas of my life. My marriage, my relationship with my kids, my work, my health, my home, travel, like my passions. I wrote them all down. And I wrote those out every single day. Now I skip weekends and stuff like that, but I'll write them out a few times a week, either in my phone or on a piece of paper. I will write them down daily. And I want to share this one with all of you. So when I went in 2019, I was working in banking. All I knew was banking, but I didn't want to do that anymore. I'd never grew up thinking that was what I was going to do. And I'd been in it 15 years. And I wrote down one sentence, and it was this: I am a successful entrepreneur who helps women live happier, healthier, and more fulfilling lives. I had no idea how the heck I could ever do it, what it would look like, but I didn't go there. I didn't tell myself how silly or stupid it was. I just wrote that sentence down every day. I then later in 2019, I moved into the advertising industry, which was a bit more creative and strategic and fun. And I got to show up more authentically. So that side of my, life started to come alive a bit more. And pandemic hit in 2020, which none of us will ever forget. And my hours went through the roof. I was working 24/7. I felt like I was on call. I was always putting out fires. It was horrible. And I knew I needed a change. And by some fate, my cell phone fell into the lake while at a cottage on summer break, the summer of 2020. And it was the first time I'd ever really disconnected from work. And when I got back after that week away and I opened my computer, there was an ad to become a coach. And it was a health, life, and transformational coach. And I was like, hold on, wait a second. That's really weird. I don't search for coaching. Like, it was just an odd ad to all of a sudden pop up. But it answered how I could meet my goal for work without being a psychologist or social worker or things like that I wasn't prepared to go back to school and invest the time and money in. So I was like, okay. I started to do that. That was August of 2020. May 2021, I left my full-time corporate job and started my own business and have been coaching and speaking for 3 years now since. And it's interesting because so many people are like, oh my gosh, you took such a big risk. Oh my gosh, like how brave, how bold, blah, blah. And I was like, you know what? I actually didn't feel like it was risky or bold. Maybe brave, sure. But I didn't feel like it was risky or bold because it aligned with exactly what I had said I wanted to do a few years prior. So I think sometimes too, if we let ourselves dream, if we let ourselves give big goals and a big vision and not get so bogged down in like how it won't work, then we're just opening ourselves up to opportunities we may not have seen before.
Yeah, I love that. And that is such a powerful story. And I mean, I can resonate with this very much so because even in my own story, and it's crazy. I was listening to something by Tony Robbins the other day, and he was even talking about like sometimes you just have to focus on the what. You ain't got to figure out the how or the. Sometimes you need to know the why. Most times, like why do I want this? But sometimes just getting that clear vision. And I'll be honest with you, I was the same, Shannon. I was like, I'm not saying that I used to not journal and like set some goals for myself, but I vastly underestimated the power of taking some time to visualize what it is. And I love how you said the 10 feel. So I'm assuming that's like, this is how I want to feel, or this is how I want to show up in these areas of my life. Is that kind of how you write those sentences?
Yeah. And even then, it's not even like, I'll give one example. It's one sentence, it's super short. And my one sentence is, I have an exceptional marriage. It's super short, but it's something that I want it to invoke a feeling of like joy or hope or warmth or something. And I'm not saying, it's funny, sometimes I tweak them because I'm not saying my marriage is going to be all roses and rainbows, right? So sometimes it sounds a bit too positive. But I want it to be like, okay, how do I want to feel? What is it? What in my life do I want that I know will make me feel good?
Yeah. And I love that because I'm telling you, same. And my journey is around 2019. I think I started like maybe visualizing in 2017 and just putting it in my view of what I could imagine would be possible. And the way it shifted and changed and grew and expanded, like you said, and probably I'm sure a lot of those 10 things you wrote down I would like to believe that maybe a good of many of them, if not more than half or all, I don't know, have already been met and you weren't expecting these till 2030. Is that right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
100%. And they evolve too. But the interesting thing too about it is if you actually take the time to think about what you value, what you want in life and your work or whatever it is in relationships, mine haven't really changed. And that's going on almost 5 years now that I've been writing those down. And they haven't really changed. But one, for example, one I had for years was that we have a cottage. And my life's evolved that my son plays competitive soccer. So we can't be away at a cottage in the summer. It's not going to be a possibility. So that dream did change and evolved into us leaving the city to be more of nature for our home and things. So some of my dreams have evolved, which I want to say too is totally okay. Like what you say set as your dream is not set in stone. You can change it. If it doesn't serve you anymore, or if you want something different, that is totally okay. But I think you might be pleasantly surprised too in a lot of the things you still believe in 10 years later. You're still either have accomplished or striving for them 10 years later.
Yeah, I love that because I love that you say because we're talking about change today, right? And that even guys, if y'all are listening, I mean, I guess you are listening if you got to this point in the podcast. But the reality is the beautiful thing about this and the beautiful thing about embracing change is that you can change what you want or what you visualize or what you would like to see different for your life. It doesn't have to be set in stone. Like, and I'm glad that you're bringing this up that you can change, you can shift, and some things will stay the same. I'm like you. I can think about 20 years ago. It's gonna be sound really crazy. When I entered adulthood, I had an idea of what wanted to do. I knew what I wanted my basis to be, and it was to help people. I didn't know which way I was going to do it. I didn't know how it was going to be possible. I didn't even know in what aspect it was going to be. Kind of like you said, I knew that I wanted to help women in this area and I had no idea what role or how that was gonna manifest or how it was going to come to life in my life, but it sounds like you just set the intention, and it's amazing how we just navigate if we are just focusing, and I'm sure you've heard the quote, "What you focus on expands," right?
Mhm.
And just focusing on that then actually gives it an opportunity to live. So, I do have a question going back to that should thing because I do think people get so wrapped up, and myself included, of how things should been. Like you said in that game of life where I just imagine you as you're describing it, planning like, okay, I want this pathway with this husband and maybe this house and this career. And this is what I should do because everybody around me modeled that for me, or I was told that that is what should happen. How do you help people break free, or what do you recommend people doing to break free from that stronghold of the should?
Okay, so I have an acronym that I wrote down, and it's kind of a funny story. So the acronym is, I have to think about it for a second, CLWOT. I kind of call it CLOT, and it stands for care less what others think. And the ironic thing is, the reason I wrote it as an acronym is because I didn't want anyone to see it. I didn't want anyone to be like, why does she have care less what others think on her phone? So it's kind of ironic. But that is a big one for me that I've been working on for a while, still a work in progress, that I care less what others think. And it's, put yourself first. So we talk about, put your oxygen mask on first. Think of it this way, put your, like who you are first and what your thoughts are and how does something make you feel over, okay, how's this thing going to come across? Or what are they going to think of me if I do this? And, hopefully you're surrounded by wonderful people and supportive people who will support you no matter what. But if you're not, also maybe it's time to like distance yourself from them too, right? If you can show up more authentically, you're going to save energy and you're going to attract people who really want to be around you for who you are. And that is such a big step versus the should. I put on, it was such an act. And it was, I was a leader of people and it was, oh, I can't tell them I'm having a bad day. Like, oh, I have to appear strong, or I can't let them know what's going on in my personal life. Like, what will they think of me? Or, all this stuff. So it was like, I put on this armor when I go to work and it was exhausting. And then who paid the price? My family, because at the end of the day, I was so tired, worn down, and grumpy. My patience was gone. And then my family got like the not great version of Shannon, who was angry and tired. And so it wasn't fair to them either. And it wasn't until my last corporate job when I really started to show up as me. And it's scary, right? Because then it's like, we have no excuse anymore. If somebody doesn't like us, well, I can't use the excuse of, oh, well, that wasn't really me. It's like, no, it's me. But for me, what happened was I actually started forming stronger relationships. It takes less thinking. And it just attracted people who I wanted to be in my life. And I think that's the thing we have to do more of is forget the shoulds and do the wants or the needs.
Yeah, this is a hard shift, guys. And I don't, and it sounds like for you, like I still have to mentally sometimes give attention to the fact that I'm operating under a should
Mhm.
and not a want or like a this is where I'm going, like a goal or a want or whatever, however you want to classify it. And I think it's so hard because there's so many times if you allow them people's opinions that want to weigh in on what they think you should do. And I'll be honest with you, I'm guilty of it too. I can think about a conversation I had with a family member recently, and I was giving my opinion. Well, you should do this, or that don't sound good. And I'm not normally one, but I was like, I'm very opinionated about what I thought this person should and shouldn't do. And I even had to pause myself and say, listen, honestly, you can do whatever in the heck you want. Like, if you want to go do that thing that I don't think you should do, you still have the ability for your life to make that choice. And then I just have to make choices accordingly of how I'm going to manage your decision, right? Or if that decision is affecting me. And in this case, it really wasn't. I was just sharing my opinion because I wanted to be opinionated that day, right? But I often think to myself when I feel trapped by shoulds is who says. So I don't know if you ever think about this yourself, but I say, okay, who said I should live like this? Who said that that was something that should be? I mean, I've learned, and I'm sure you've met a lot of people, Shannon. People can live this life 1,000 times different ways over. If you wanna go be a nomad on the beach, go be a nomad on the beach. I mean, yes, you're gonna have to figure out how to feed yourself. You might need to get some fishing skills, but you can make that change. You can do that. It doesn't have to be the
Yeah.
traditional, this is what we've maybe been taught or led to believe or raised to believe that this is how things should be. But I'm glad that you spoke to how you break through that should barrier and then that phrase of care less what others think because it's a barrier that can really hold you back from truly being authentically you. And hearing your story, I'm thinking to myself, man, how exhausting must it have been to show up to work every day and try to project an image or a persona that you thought other people essentially is what I'm hearing. Tell me if this is wrong, that other people thought that you should be. I mean, that is the most tiring thing ever, right? And how is it different now that you can actually be yourself authentically?
And I shared that story. So I share a lot of, I know at the end I'll share how to find me, but I'm very vulnerable now. I overshare. I share a lot of stuff that my husband's like, I can't believe you shared that on social media. But I think I'm in a position now where I'm like, I want to know. I want to know people aren't alone through whatever they're going through. And, you're going to find someone who's been in the exact same situation as you. And we just aren't great at always sharing the messy. So I'm getting, a lot of what I do now is share that messy, share what I went through and all of that. And yeah, it might be embarrassing at times or things like that. But it was interesting because I shared how I was always, pretending to be somebody else at work. And my step grandma, who's 90, reached out to me and she's like, I would have had no clue.
Yeah.
You always have a smile on your face. You're always so upbeat. You're always so positive. And that is, tend to be that. That's not an act. But it was like, she was like, I had no clue. And that's the thing. I'm like, even my family didn't know.
Mhm. Yeah. And listen, I mean, I'm a therapist, okay? And I've had the honor and privilege of, even I tell people on here I do my own therapy, but it's been an honor and privilege to see behind the curtain of a lot of things that people struggle with. And what I wish people knew is that what you see is not always what is. And people typically are like you said, I'm glad you're sharing more of the messy. I call it the messy middle or the messy reality of life, you know. If somebody shows up and they seem like they're having a perfect day every day, think again. It's not the truth. I'm not saying that they're not having a good
Yeah.
day, but it takes a lot of courage to show up authentically as yourself. And then, like you said, be vulnerable in a place, in a space where other people might not always receive or perceive you in the light that you are intending them to see you. But I think finding ways to show up more authentically really, and that's, it sounds like what you help people do, really has helped you be able to live better. Is that what I'm
Yeah.
hearing?
You are. You got it.
Yeah, life's too short, folks. We talk about that on here, but life is too short. You all, as far as I know, I don't know what happens when we get to the other side, but y'all get one try at this, one try. So might as well go ahead and have it be something that it feels good to you. Because I always say I'm going to be the first person. I'm going to be the person that has shown up for me my whole life. Doesn't mean that other people aren't going to show up for me and people that I love are going to be there. But when it comes time for me to go wherever it is we go, then I'm going. You know, and ain't nobody going with me. Nobody's going with me. As far as I know. I mean, we don't know. We don't know. And everybody has beliefs on that. But this is not a religious podcast. We're not talking about the afterlife. We're going to stick to change while we can still do it on earth. Okay. So, Shannon, speaking of, if people are like, okay, y'all been talking about this change stuff. And you know what? Maybe I'm trying to make a career change or I want to take a life change. And I I may not know what I want, I just don't know, kinda like you found yourself in, of what that next change is for me. How can somebody find you, work with you, connect with you?
Awesome. Yeah. So my website is shannontalbot.com. And you can also find me I'm quite active on LinkedIn, Shannon Talbot, Instagram, Shannon Talbot _coaching. And I actually am it's pretty exciting. I'm just about to launch some mini coaching programs around change and embracing change and fighting your fear to go after whatever goal you have, big or small. So you can check my website out, my social media out, reach out to me too if you'd like to get more info. Be happy to share more.
Okay, awesome. Well, Shannon, I have a question that I like to ask my guests at the end of this. And really it's more about, you know, we've been focusing a lot on where we want to go, but this question is more geared to what is one piece of advice or encouragement that you would give to younger you if you could go back and give yourself some of these it might be one of these pearls of wisdom you just dropped here, but I don't know. What is the one thing that you would tell younger you if you could?
Don't be afraid to be yourself. We're all created unique for a reason. Everyone has beautiful gifts to give, and we're meant to give them. So, you know what? Just show up as yourself and you will shine.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Shannon, for being on here today. I just want to appreciate and acknowledge you for the work that you did yourself to realize I am not feeling fulfilled at this place in my life and I've got to figure it out. And you not only embraced fear of the unknown, embraced maybe even the fear of success, but you also put in the hard work and you didn't stop there. You were like, okay, well, I've done this work. Now I want to help other people. And so I just appreciate you for coming and sharing some of these things that will hopefully help our listeners today maybe reconceptualize change and be able to identify for themselves what may be holding them back from change. So thanks for coming.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, and if y'all listen, y'all know I give you one piece of advice or one thing that maybe stood out to me that I'd love for you to take with you today. And I mean, you can listen to this whole thing again and maybe your takeaway will be different than my takeaway. But what I'm going to encourage you today is don't be afraid of change. Remember, change is a normal part of life. And sometimes what's waiting on the other side of the unknown is pretty spectacular. But sometimes you just got to put in the work and address those fears a little bit at a time. Until next time. That's all for today on Inspiring Possible. If you found a little inspiration today, please go on over to iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you tune in to listen to leave us a comment and rate us. Also, make sure and link up with me at inspiringpossible.com to get the free Dream It, Write It, Do It workbook. And don't forget to follow us on social media and share this with anyone who needs to be inspired. Remember, if you can believe it, it's possible.